今年是我从清华毕业20周年。20年以前，我和我后来的太太来到美国。All we had were several pieces of luggage. We spoke a different language and faced an unknown world, but we just kept going because we know that this is a place of possibilities. Perhaps no one else is more qualified to show how far these possibilities can lead to than our guest of honor today. Welcome former Secretary of Labor and Secretary of Transportation, Honorable Elaine Chao.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this 5th Grand Convention. And I want to also acknowledge Tsinghua President, University President, who just gave us such an outstanding virtual message updating all of you on what's happening in the university. I've also had the pleasure of getting reacquainted once again with Tsinghua University Vice Chancellor and want to thank him for his hospitality. I think he deserves a round of applause. And of course, the chair of NAFTHAA, who's also the chief coordinator of this grand convention, the president of DC, Tsinghua Alumni Association. You've all done a great job in getting this ready, so thank you so much. Actually, Tsinghua and my family have a relationship that goes back years. When I was Secretary of Labor, I made a special trip to visit Tsinghua in 2008. And in 2015, my father, Dr. James S.C. Chao, Zhao Xicheng 博士, and my sister, Angela Chao, Zhao Anji, and I visited Tsinghua and we interacted with a number of students. And then in 2017, I was already back in government, so I couldn't go, but my father and sister visited Tsinghua and launched his biography at Tsinghua University's hospitality, and his biography was named Fearless Against the Wind. I think you invited me here because you were interested and curious about my background and the issues and the challenges and the opportunities facing the Asian American community here in America. Well, my story cannot be told without mentioning my parents. And as Asian Americans, we instinctively understand and live the concept of filial piety, one of our core values. My father came from a small farming village of 8 families outside of Shanghai. His father, Zhao Yiren, was a school principal and cited as one of the best 72 teachers in China at the time. My father relied upon scholarships to obtain his education. My mother, on the other hand, Zhao Zhumulan, was born in Lai'an County in Anhui Province to a distinguished and progressive family that actually believed in the education of women. She and her sisters attended Mingde Girls High School, and it was run by missionaries in Nanjing. My parents met in the winter of 1949 when my father returned from college to visit his alma mater, Jiading No. 1 High School. My mother had matriculated there, moving from Nanjing, and under normal social times, 2 young people of such different backgrounds would never have been able to meet. There's an expression, and I'm gonna forget it, it's about the door levels, mengdeng, you know what I'm talking about. So as my father says, in turmoil, there is opportunity. Without that time, he would have never met my mother. My father majored in celestial navigation, so he had to go to sea aboard a ship to acquire sea experience. And while his ship was at sea, The government changed, all the ports were blockaded, and he was unable to return to Shanghai. He was the only child, and it weighed heavily on him that he was never able to take good care of his parents. He was 21 years old, all alone. But my father had ability and guts. He looked for my mother on Taiwan for 2 years. He finally found her, they got married, and eventually he became the youngest sea captain at the age of 29. But sea life was difficult. He was apart from the family months at a time. So he took a national examination, scored #1, broke all the records, and had the chance to come to America. His wife, my mother, was then 7 months pregnant with their 3rd child. But she bravely supported his decision to go abroad, even though they didn't know how long it would take for our family to be reunited. My father went to America first, and it took him 3 years before he was able to bring my mother, my 2 sisters, and me to America. And he did not see his 3rd child until she was 3 years old. When we arrived, we lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York. My father held 3 jobs to make ends meet. We didn't speak the language, understand the customs of this country. We even had a hard time eating the food, hamburgers, hot dogs, pizza. They were so strange. Needless to say, our initial years here were very difficult. But we had our family, faith in God, and hope. And these are tremendous assets in building a new life anywhere. I also want to note, because I know so many of you are parents and you'd be interested, my parents spent an enormous amount of time with the family. After working so hard during the week, my father would still have energy to take the whole family out sightseeing in New York City. Of course, our little 1-bedroom was so small, we had to get out of there. But we took in all the sights that were free in New York City because we couldn't afford anything that had an entrance fee. And this is how we learned about America. But as our economic situation improved and we were able to move from an apartment to a house on Long Island, every Saturday, my father would lead the children, all the children, to help clean the house, to alleviate the burden of housework for my mother. Every Saturday, springtime, the children would go out into the garden and dig up all the weeds. Anybody who owns a house would know that there's a lot of work. So my father would always have one of the daughters accompany him, helping to hand him tools, hold the flashlight, and as we accompanied and helped our father on these chores, spending hours together on a weekend, he would tell us about life in China. He would tell us about Chinese philosophical thinking and culture and traditions. And then on Sundays, we went to church. We did not have very much free time. There was no conflict between our Chinese culture and our American life because my parents believed that both are complementary and both define who we are, and we can be bridges between East and West. I share this story to say to you, for so many of you in this room, I know that your story is our story. Many of you have made sacrifices so that your children could have better lives here. And I'm here to say, even though the journey in the beginning is hard, the journey is well worth it. In this country, if you work hard, have determination, perseverance, and good ideas, you will likely succeed, because this is a country that responds to energy. And as long as you don't give up, you will advance. Number 2, my parents taught their children to take the best of East and West, and therefore I have always treasured my Chinese heritage. So for example, my parents always said, number 1, be a good person, 做好人. Number 2, contribute to society, 贡献. And take the long-term point of view. Do things in moderation. This is something very different than Western culture. Not too hot, not too low. So not too hot, not too cold. Be harmonious in your interpersonal relationships. These Chinese wisdoms have given me strength, comfort, courage, and insight. And I'm very grateful for that. And now, if I may, I'd like to talk about some issues facing our community today. The first one, let me talk about the continuing violence against Asian Americans. Everyone suffered during COVID, but Asian Americans were particularly hard. And we now know this because when I was Secretary of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which reported to the Department of Labor for the first time in 2003, broke out Asian and Asian American employment in its own separate category, a historic first. And that's how we know that unemployment among Asian Americans ranks among the lowest of any group in America. It was about 2.4% pre-COVID. And during COVID, the unemployment among Asian American groups in certain cities soared to over 14% in the initial months because so many Asian Americans are small business owners whose businesses were devastated by the pandemic. So as co-chair of the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, I tried to disseminate the information on government assistance, and as the Asian American community became targets of hate and violence, we worked with the Justice Department to combat violence against Asian Americans and Asians. But even as our country emerges from COVID, the APA community continues to be targets of anti-Asian hate and violence. And I think the increasingly tense US-China relations is contributing to this anti-Asian sentiment. There are fears within our community of the establishment of Chinese concentration camps. People outside our community can't even believe that this is a possibility. But regardless, such fears within our community exist, and I have always made it my task to voice the concerns of the community. So all of us need to be vigilant and combat this injustice, and I'll talk a little bit later on about what I propose. Number two, I'd like to talk about the Supreme Court decision of June 29th of this year. This is a very, very important issue that needs your attention for your children's sake. The Supreme Court released on June 29th its historic decision on the use of race in college admissions, ending an over 50-year precedent that allowed colleges and universities to broadly consider race in their admissions processes. What does this mean for Asian Americans, and in particular, Chinese American students in admissions to the highest universities and colleges in this country? Let me say, it is important for you to understand that ever since the 1960s, colleges and universities across America, it's not just Harvard, it's across America, they have a social policy. They have implemented a social policy that had as its goal creating an entering class that looked like America to create diversity. And the way to accomplish this is to construct an entering class based on national population ratios. So in the 1960s, Asian Americans were less than 1% of the national population. Now, we are about 6.7% of the national population. But whatever that number is, that is the percentage of the class that Asian Americans can be entitled to. So that means that the ideal class in universities and colleges across America were comprised of 18% Hispanic Americans, 14% African Americans, because that is their national population averages, and only 6.7% Asian Americans. But we are a talented and hardworking communities, and Asian Americans are admitted at higher numbers than our national population average. So for example, at Harvard, the class is about 22%, and in fact, they've now increased it to 29% because of the lawsuit, the specter of the lawsuit at the Supreme Court. So, but because we are admitted in large numbers, larger and higher than our national population of 6.7%, Asian Americans are called an overrepresented minority, while the other two racial groups are called underrepresented minorities. And what this means is underrepresented minorities are given special treatment for admissions. So for a community like ours that emphasizes hard work and education as the primary pathway to advancement, having policies like preferential treatment for certain other groups that harm our children cuts us to our core. Discrimination against Asian American students are also trickling down now to the high schools. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology in Fairfax, Virginia, just a few miles from here, they routinely rank as one of the best public magnet schools in America, and the admission is highly competitive. Even though Asian Americans comprise only 16.6% of Northern Virginia's population, over 70% of the student population at Thomas Jefferson High School is of Asian heritage. So in 2020, the Fairfax board members and administrators expressed frustration that other populations are underrepresented. So they changed the admissions policies to take diversity into consideration. The first freshman class admitted under the new rules saw a significantly different racial makeup. African American students increased from 1% to 7%. Hispanic representation increased from 3% to 11%. Asian American students decreased from 73% to 54%. Their grades were higher, their academic achievements were better, but their numbers were cut back. So when parents complained to the school board, they were told, well, you're only 16.6% of the North Virginia population. You have over 54% of the class being Asian Americans. So what are you complaining about? Well, we're complaining that the basis is not on merit, and that those who deserve to be admitted are not admitted. So the Asian American parents sued the school, and this case is being appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court will likely make a decision as to whether they will hear this case by the end of the year. The crux of this matter is the concept of diversity. We are all for diversity. I'm for diversity. But to create a more diverse class, one that looks like America, institutions use the national population averages to achieve diversity rather than merit. I have never been a supporter of quotas or goals as a tool to determine how to distribute opportunity in our country. Asian Americans are too small a population, only 6.2% in the 2020 census. In a society dominated by numerical superiority rather than by merit, Asian Americans will always have to wait behind other racial groups. So I think the Asian American community is awakening to this issue, but don't quite know how to advocate for the community. Candidly, this issue is fraught with politics. Most Asian American activist groups who are aligned primarily with the left, they don't want to tackle this issue because it threatens their political alignment with their liberal allies with whom they have to work on many other issues. Republicans and conservative groups who tend to believe in achievement based on merit and individual merit, even so, some Republicans are reluctant to tread into this field because they're afraid of offending other racial groups, and those other racial groups have far greater numerical superiority than we do. So I'm actually not very optimistic that this Supreme Court decision will have an immediate benefit to Asian Americans, even though it should. As soon as the Supreme Court issued its decision, many universities and colleges right away issued their reaction. And you may have received some of their emails. I did, from my graduate school, from my undergraduate school. And they basically said, of course, they'll comply with the Supreme Court decision not to use race in admissions. They have to. That's the law. They cannot say otherwise. But they assured the public and the university community that they would try to accomplish their diversity goals through another way. So the Chief Justice John Roberts' majority opinion left a little wiggle room on how to salvage these policies that the university leaders are ideologically committed to. He says, while race cannot be used as a criteria, colleges can consider an individual's application essay and how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. So colleges will now ask essay questions about topics like diversity that will give them latitude to quietly take into consideration race in ways that will be more subtle. And we're seeing this trend already, as many colleges and universities eliminate the requirement in admission for standard tests and rely more on personal essays. Number 3, let me talk to you about another topic, and that is an increasing trend of prohibitions against foreign nationals buying real estate in America. Recently, 4 states have passed, and 20 states are considering or proposing legislation that prevents property ownership by citizens from select foreign countries. In Texas, a bill to ban Iranian, Syrian, North Korean, Russian, and Chinese citizens from buying farmlands near important installations. Important installations is very vague. Meanwhile, a bill in Florida banning citizens of most of these same countries from buying property near critical infrastructure, which can be a road, a bridge, was signed into law last year. While there are specific, legitimate threats that these foreign governments and their state-owned enterprises pose to our national security, banning individuals from purchasing land or properties because of their citizenship, national origin, race, ethnicity, or immigration status conjures up memories of the anti-Chinese laws passed in the last century. Now, the recently passed bill in Florida forbidding Chinese nationals from owning property will probably be challenged in court, as it should be. There are companies whose workforce consists of green card holders or H-1B visa holders. They're not citizens who will be adversely impacted. And this act may adversely impact a company's ability to recruit. So many Asian Americans are increasingly, I think, feeling the need to speak out. But how do we speak out? We need to learn to organize, to form coalitions, to approach institutions of influence like the media, to influence public opinion. We need to get more involved and engage with mainstream America and not hesitate to talk about our values, our opinions. We can also write letters to our editors, op-eds, approach our elected officials, elect more Asian Americans, contribute more to candidates, get more involved with our community, get more involved with our nonprofit organizations so that we become thought leaders within our communities. We need to expand beyond our own comfort zone. This all takes time, experience, and skill, especially since we are still a relatively small minority of the population. But this also means that the ability to communicate is so important. This country is a democracy, and the ability to persuade others is very important. So the ability to communicate effectively, verbally, and in writing is a very good skill. And if you speak with an accent, not a problem. 25 years ago, that might have been, but nowadays we're so much more tolerant of people who are different. So there's no cause to be shy or hesitant to engage with mainstream America. Now, more Asian Americans are thinking about running for office. I'm often asked for advice, and this is what I say. Running for office requires commitment, determination, and energy. It also requires courage. Courage to put yourself in the public arena, courage to ask people for money, for votes, courage to be rejected. The political arena is increasingly nasty, partisan, even in nonpartisan races. And that's why the candidates have to understand and believe in what they're saying and doing. So my first piece of advice is you have to have a core set of values that you believe in, that propels you to run. Unless the seat is nonpartisan, the candidate generally has to select a side, either a R or a D. And once decided, you shouldn't change, okay? No flipping back and forth. Number 2, research the past voter history of the seat or district. Is this seat winnable? Sometimes, no matter how good or qualified the candidate is, if the seat is not winnable, don't try. Sometimes the party, be it a Democrat or Republican, would encourage a candidate to run, even if there's little chance of success. Why? Because they want to fill their ballot. There's a whole ballot. They want to fill every single one of those spots with a candidate's name in case there's a wind that blows everybody in, they'll have someone for that seat as well. But the candidate has to consider for himself or herself what the district or the seat is like. So if the candidate is blue and the district is red, doesn't look too good. Same thing. If the candidate is red and the seat is blue, doesn't look too good. Now, if the seat or district is purple, there's a better chance of success. But even if you are red running for a red seat, if you are blue running for a blue seat, that doesn't mean you won't have competition. If you run red in a red seat or blue in a blue seat, you will face a primary challenge, people from your same party running. But the best seats for success are usually, one, if the candidate's values are aligned with the district values, and two, if there's an open seat, because incumbents are hard to beat. Number 3, I would recommend that the candidate try to meet the party leaders, seek their support, because in larger races, the party can provide the people infrastructure to support the candidate's race, like providing volunteers, giving money for mailings, or just advice. So having these leaders support you can be very helpful. Fourth thing I tell people who want to run for office, you have to raise money. Remember, this is a democracy. It takes a lot of financial resources to get your message out. There's so much competition for messages. So if a candidate can raise money from people, those people will likely vote for the candidate, assuming they live in the district. It's not hard to raise money. You have to start with your family and friends. If they really love you, they'll put out the maximum. And then you expand out to your network of contacts. And raising money is just like making sales calls. It's a process of percentages. The more you call, a candidate calls, the greater the chances of getting money. If only 20% of the people called give, spend more time calling more people, and more money will come in. The candidate must also make the calls themselves, because most people want to hear from the candidate. But I think the most important thing is enjoy the process. View it as a way to get to know people and America. Lastly, I might warn, there are election fundraising rules. What monies can be accepted and how much. It's important that your team know what the fundraising rules are and be in compliance. And then don't forget local offices. They're enormously important for the quality of life. And, for example, running for school board seats. The school boards are very powerful, and they've been the launching pad for many elected officials. So in San Francisco, for example, during COVID, parents began to realize what teachers were teaching their children because their children were right in the same room with them. And a lot of the Asian American community didn't like what they were hearing. So they rose up and surged in response, resulting in unusually large voter numbers during the recall elections of board members. Parents in that election witnessed that the board was more concerned about renaming a third of its schools to politically correct names rather than advancing school education for their children. So several of the parents ran for the local school board, won, and replaced 3 of the incumbent school board members. So change is possible, but wishing isn't enough. These parents didn't simply wish, they acted, and that made all the difference. Let me say one other thing is, but being in the public arena is not easy, and it's not without attacks. Through no fault of mine, my being in public office, and my husband too, I suppose, have brought attacks on my wonderful family, who epitomize the American dream. People have attacked my family, alleging supposed ties to China. My American father is called a Shanghainese businessman. My family and my patriotism is questioned by the New York Times, CNN, Forbes magazine. My family is really funny. They say, well, at least they know who you are. My social profile has been vandalized. A former president calls me racial taunts. I mean, it's hard to fight against the onslaught, even with professional help. It's like a tidal wave. The media is so powerful, and they shape perceptions of reality. So amidst all of this turmoil, I think it's important to keep in mind who we are. My parents have always imbued within their daughters pride in our ethnic heritage. My father has always said, when Asian Americans first came to America, we were so eager to learn. Now we can teach. We need to have pride in ourselves, our culture, our heritage, our accomplishments, and contribution to America. Yes, you have to be tough. You have to have a thick hide to be in this world that we are in, I'm in. But it's important to know what your values are, because that tells you why you are fighting. In closing, I want to let you know what I'm doing about some of these issues that we've talked about. I am working with the Congress and the Smithsonian to establish a National Asian American Museum in Washington. I would like to think that if people were more educated, they would be less biased. It's going to take a long time to build this museum, but our time is coming. And that's why I wrote the Washington Post op-ed recently advocating for the National Museum on the National Mall. It has to be on the National Mall. Okay? Because the National Mall houses all the other most important institutions and museums of our country. The hardships endured and the sacrifices made by the Chinese immigrants is a part of America's history that must be brought to everyone's attention. The recognition of our history can help to counter Asian American discrimination and violence, and our story, among so many millions of others, is a distinctly American one that deserves to be told. The worsening of the US-China relations has had an impact on the violence and anti-Asian sentiments. But that's why I think those of you who are in this room are so important, because you are all recipients of this wonderful education. You are the cream of the crop in our cultural homeland. You have received so much in terms of education and ability to influence others. You are now in a different country where understanding of different cultures, especially Asian cultures, becomes more important than ever before. You are influencers. You are leaders in your communities. And what you say affects others. And you must share the values that we share as Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, which has given me such comfort, strength, and wisdom that we share this with mainstream America. When you feel confident, and I used to raise money for United Way, $3.2 billion a year. I never thought I was begging for money. I thought I was giving a wonderful gift to the donor. Everybody wants to work for a larger goal than themselves. And you are giving the wonderful knowledge about your cultural heritage, your philosophy, the history of a different land, and all of this. If you feel that you're giving a gift, you will be emboldened, energetic, and you will be very much motivated. So I have always felt so thankful that I've had the privilege of having wonderful families who imbued strong values in my sisters and me. That made us strong. And where we are today, we would not be without the values that we have. So to the leaders in this room, I so admire you. So many people admire graduates of Tsinghua University. I mean, my goodness, that's a big deal. And so congratulations on all of your achievements, and we look forward to your leadership in the future. Thank you so much.
再次感谢赵部长的演讲。我们远在清华大学的工字厅分会场，其实也一直在关注着赵部长的演讲。 我们连线我们的校长、校领导和校友会的理事们。